And with me tonight, I'm very happy to be seated here with Captain Dominick from the Sheriff's Department here in Missoula. And he's going to be talking to us as well about kind of what you can and can't do from the legal standpoint, as well as, from the legal standpoint. So Josh mentioned a couple of rules, and rules sounds really harsh to me. I prefer the word guidelines. And the reason that we set any guidelines at all in a facility or in a group like this is simply there's a lot of us. And if we all want to have a turn to say something, if we all want to share something, it's nice to have a few guidelines before we do, so that we can kind of hold these guidelines just as we move through the night. And so these came out of council training that I did with Virginia Coyle several years ago. She's part of the Ojai Institute in California. And they're just really wonderful ways of being together. And so the first guideline when we're in a group together is simply to listen deeply. And listening deeply just means that when somebody's speaking, you're not already thinking about what you want to say, especially if you get triggered by something that somebody says. Kind of just let it go for a moment and just come back to listening to what that person is saying. And it just makes for a welcoming environment for the person who's speaking. They don't feel pressured or judged in that moment. And then the second part of that is when it is time to speak from your heart. Not just speaking about what we know, although we are going to be sharing some knowledge, some facts, but it's really wonderful to just be able to speak from your heart, from your experience and from your kind of inner self, rather than just from your head. The third guideline would be to be spontaneous, not knowing ahead what you're going to say. So when somebody's speaking, a lot of times instead of listening deeply, we're thinking about, okay, this is great, I'm going to say this, and this is going to be a wonderful thing to say. But instead, if you have something that you feel moved to say, just when it's time, don't have it prepared, see what comes out. It's really amazing sometimes. You can surprise yourself with what is coming from your heart. The third piece is that is the third piece, spontaneity. But the fourth piece is to, in a group this size, be brief. I've heard it described as going to essence. So try to get to the kernel of what you're going to say in as few words as possible. For some people, they can get to that in a few words. Some people might need a few minutes. It's going to be different for each individual, but just trying to get to the point as quickly as possible. Hopefully that's what I just did. So the guidelines are to listen deeply, speak from the heart, be spontaneous, and try to be brief or go to essence. That seems pretty reasonable, especially in a group this size. There's a lot of people here tonight. It's really wonderful. So that said, I'm going to turn it over to Captain Dominick. He's going to tell us a little bit about himself, his role, as well as what happens exactly when a person passes away in the home.
I'll be brief. The sheriff has cautioned me about speaking spontaneity, so I won't speak my mind very much. I'll try not to. So the way it works in Missoula County and most of Montana is you have elected sheriff coroner. So that you elect a sheriff, and he's also the coroner. To do that program, in Missoula we have 12 deputy coroners, which I'm the chief deputy coroner. I'm also captain of detectives. So I've been a cop about a little over 20 years. I was an Air Force officer for 13 years before that. I did 3 years at Lake County, and I've been here in Missoula County for 17 years. So any unattended deaths in the county, if a person dies at home, they would call for a coroner to come out. Any deaths at the hospital where a person's been admitted for less than 24 hours and isn't under the care of a regular doctor, the coroner also comes out to make sure there's no suspicious circumstances. So we do deaths at home that are unattended, deaths at the hospital that we're not really sure about, and then every homicide, suicide, or accident, by law, the coroner investigates. Now, we're not doctors, we're cops. So to assist us in that, we have a state medical examiner. We're lucky they're right here in Missoula. So if a person passes away, we normally talk to their doctor to see what they think happened. We get medical records. We're still not sure. We'll call the state medical examiner. And if we have to, we'll do an autopsy. And when that's done, the county pays for the autopsy. Sometimes families want an autopsy done when I believe I know what the cause of death is, so the county won't pick up the tab. That's on the family to pay a forensic pathologist at the hospital to do the autopsy. So what we're looking to investigate is to find the cause and manner of death. So if I'm walking down the street and somebody stabs me with a knife and I die, the cause is going to be knife wound, and the manner would be homicide. If I'm home cooking dinner and stab myself in the leg and bleed out and die, then the cause is going to be an accident, or the manner will be accident, and the cause would still be that knife wound. Same thing if I wanted to end my life and cut myself with a knife, then it's still going to be knife wound for a cause, and manner would be suicide. So by law, we have to make that determination. So coroner duty is, the farther you go up in rank, the more you are a coroner. All our sergeants are coroners out on our street sergeants. So if you have a patrol car going up and down the road, there's a sergeant out there somewhere, and he's the on-duty coroner. If he has a day off, or he has too many calls, or the call that he can't handle, all the staff officers from lieutenant and up are on-call coroners. I'm an on-call coroner. I'm on call right now. I've had 2 coroner calls in the last 2 days. So we actually keep very, very busy in Missoula. You've got the population's getting older. We have 2 hospitals here, so people move into town for health care. We have the university, which gives us a little more business than we would like. The transient population is at risk. So unfortunately, there's a lot of work for coroners here in Missoula. We're happy to participate with hospice. We love hospice. The greatest thing for us for hospice is that a person enrolled in hospice care is under the continuous care of a doctor. So, which takes me off the hook. I don't respond to hospice calls. And what's nice for the families in hospice is that the cops don't come, the ambulance doesn't come, the coroner doesn't come. It's probably a lot more relaxed atmosphere. And the nice thing about it for me is it takes the load off us. So we don't have to, we have less cases because we're overwhelmed as it is. So hospice is like our favorite people. I promise you that. But there's exceptions in hospice care still. If a person, you guys remember Bob Heinley, the police officer that was shot years ago? All right, so I was the coroner on his case, and he died from really kind of a natural death as a result of his paralysis, but it was a homicide. So if Bob had been in hospice care, I still would have investigated that as a homicide. So if a person is in hospice care, and the nurses have to remember, if your person is in hospice care due to an accident, a suicide attempt, or some type of assault, it's still going to be a coroner case, even though you're enrolled in hospice. That make sense? So that's how that's going to work. So hospice to us is a very good service, a wonderful service. One day I hope to be under hospice care and not have some cranky deputy show up at my house. So what I was asked to talk about tonight was home burial. This came up. I know we had a gentleman a number of months ago that was determined by God he didn't want to give any money to a funeral home, and he wanted to be buried at home, and it kind of came up at the last minute. So hospice started calling me, and I had to do some research. I'd only been doing the job, the chief deputy job, for a year. So I called all around, got all the information I could. But so if you're thinking about a home burial, there's very few laws in Montana. I put some handouts up here on the table that are all the laws we know about. The Missoulian did a real good article a couple of years ago on at-home burial, but it's pretty liberal in Montana. The first thing you need to do is basically pick a site. According to the health department, there's no permits or anything. You can't do it inside the city, so not inside the city limits. So we're talking about out in the county. So you need to pick a site. It's got to be at least 100 feet away from a water source, like a well, a septic tank, a creek, any free-flowing water. You want to be 100 feet away from that and not in the floodplain. So a lot of places down there in low is too low. So outside the floodplain. Then there's a form. Anything government's involved in, there's going to be a form. So at the clerk and recorder's office, there's a form called Authorization for Removal, Transportation, and Disposition of a Dead Body. The doctor fills this out, or the coroner, or the mortician. So some people now are bypassing the funeral home. So what they need to do is go to the clerk and recorder's office, or call my office, and I can do it for you. But you get this form, and you fill it out, and there's kind of a sample up there, but you fill it out, either I fill it out, the doctor fills it out, the hospice doctor or PA could fill it out, and that's filed with the state through the clerk and recorder's office, and there's a $5 fee. So this has to be done. And then the location where the body is going to be has to be, you have to have a location that can be found in the future, so it actually goes on the death certificate. Whether it's a GPS coordinates out in the field, whether it's an address, that has to be filled out so it can be located in the past. The one thing that health department cautions is that your relatives may want to sell that property at one time, so they caution you on that. If you're going to have a family burial plot with over 6 plots, you need to, I believe, register that with the state. I don't know how you go about doing that, but I'm sure the state has. The county doesn't. The state's going to have a requirement to at least have that as a registered burial plot. You're not required to have a casket. You're not required to have a liner like a vault, anything like that. And you're not required to be embalmed. So that's why it's above the water table. You look down in Louisiana when they had those horrible problems with bodies laying on, that's why. Up here it's a little cooler, so it wouldn't quite be that awful. But if this is the type, people are going to natural burials nationwide. There is kind of a trend for natural burials. The biggest trend in Missoula right now, and probably nationwide, is cremations. Cremation, disposing of ashes in cremations is pretty much wherever you want, and there's not really any hazard in cremains. There is an administrative rule for the state of Montana that if you're transporting a body, we had a person die in Seeley Lake just a month or 2 ago, and they called me up and I said, well, how are you going to take the body to where you're going? They wanted to go from Seeley Lake through Missoula and I believe up into St. Ignatius or Arlene. And I said, you have to get this form. So we filled out the form. I said, well, how are you going to? Well, put him in the truck. And that's fine. That's fine. But if it's going to take you over 36 hours, if you're going to go, you want to go back to Iowa to put somebody in a family plot in Iowa, if it's going to take you more than 36 hours, you need to ice the body down in some way, whether it's a electronic refrigerator, whether it's dry ice, anything over 36 hours. Unfortunately, in the coroner business and the cop business, I deal with a lot of deceased people, and I've dealt with people that have been deceased for months and been found. And months in an apartment is bad. So I would, if you're going to be moving a dead body for long distances or anything else, why don't you either call the mortician, because they do it professionally, could give you good advice. Hire the morticians, because they're professionals. You can call me for advice, but I would say speed is of the essence. Okay, so that's pretty much, you should, and the other law is that you put them in some type of container. There's no rule when you go to a funeral home or anything. My father was cremated back in Virginia, and my father was very thrifty. So he had some big demands that we were gonna cut rate. This whole thing was, by God, if they were gonna get a nickel out of us, they were gonna earn it. So he was gonna be cremated, and the mortician was there, and he starts making a pitch for the casket. I said, nope, no casket. My brothers are nodding their heads. The guy goes, well, you'll need to do a pine box. I said, what is he in right now? Well, he's in a cardboard container. I'm thinking, my dad would like a cardboard container. So I said, well, that sounds good. And I've been a cop by then for a long time, too. So the guys just treat me like a terrible cheapskate. My dad never paid retail for anything. And we would have been happy. So we owe this guy like whatever, $198.75. By God, he was proud to give us our quarter back. Treated us like the most horrible cheapskates, but my dad was laughing the whole time. I knew so. So you can do what you want to do. You can't be forced into doing anything. The laws in Montana are very liberal, so families can do, in Montana, you can pretty much do exactly what you would like to do. So that's as much as I know about the funeral laws. Yes, ma'am.
What happens when you sell the property?
That, you've got it, you're supposed to notify.
Disclose it?
Now, that's what the health department says, you are supposed to tell them. Now, they don't cite a law or anything like that, but obviously, it would probably be best to tell them. That's up to you. I would think the deeper the better. Think outside, Dr. Rance is laughing, outside the water table. Don't go 30 foot deep where your well's at, but I would get here, if you're going to do this at home, get some advice. You know, there's tons of stuff anymore. The whole world's open on the internet. There's tons of things on home burial, natural burials, those type of issues, not burials. I mean, there's places where they're doing the Native American style, old style burials where they put people above ground. So you just have to look at what your desires are and try to be sensible.
I have a question too. Way back, probably the first sentence out of your mouth, you said an unattended death. Did you mean by a physician?
Yes, unattended by a physician, yes.
Because you said call us, and I thought
Well, you
unattended
call
death, the
911.
person's just
No.
dead. How are they gonna
Well,
call?
Eventually, you'll be found. That's the one thing I promise you. Eventually, somebody stops by.
But you meant unattended
Unattended by a
physician.
doctor, yes, ma'am.
Right.
Yes, ma'am.
Actually, it's a little bit more refined than that, isn't it? If you have been under the care of a physician, even though you're not under hospice.
Within 30 days.
Yeah.
And that's at the hospital, though. That you have to already be at the hospital.
Oh.
That's the N24 rule, the natural
Yeah,
death
it used
within
to be
24
that
hours.
if there was a doc that really knew you, you could.
No, not anymore. Not
Good.
anymore. What we're trying to do, and as cops, we're deathly afraid of a person being murdered and us missing it. You know, the toughest thing right now in Montana, in Missoula, I can tell you right up front, is I'm scared to death of my guys mistaking a homicide for a suicide. We get so overwhelmed. Right now, the average, I was at a class today, but the average year after year in Missoula County for suicides is about 17 to 23 a year. That's the average. So that's, you know, almost every 2 weeks, every 2.5 weeks, my deputies, my partners respond to a suicide. Or the city officers, then one of our coroners goes. So this last year, though, the last calendar year, instead of 20 suicides, we had 32. So, and I've had 2 this week, already in the new year. So that's what we're really nervous about, is people faking a homicide to look like a suicide. So that's why we want to be careful, because we don't want an injustice to go uncalled. But the suicide rate right now is terrible. And I don't know, well, I think it's the economy, but it's terrible. The at-risk age group right now seems to be 50 to 60-year-old males. It's the baby boomers nationwide are committing suicide at a high rate. And the highest rate here in Missoula was the 50 to 60-year-old males.
Me.
I have a couple of questions. One is, you've been talking about the state of Montana, so does that apply to no such burial within any city limit, any municipality?
I don't know. I don't know. I know Missoula County.
Okay.
And I know nothing inside the city limits in Missoula County.
Okay, so it's not certain that this is allowed in Gallo County? or any other county?
I would check with the health department in that county.
Okay. My other question was, in Missoula County, would a pyre be permitted?
I have seen nothing that says no. I think you would call, I understand it. No, I understand. I would call the health department because they would probably get into the air quality guys and they might tell you no.
Not to mention there's no burning.
I was gonna say,
Well,
allow you to have a fire.
Right. Yeah.
I think Sheriff Ibsen would like to have a Viking ship up on Flathead one day, and I don't know. I think we could probably get away with it, but I don't know.
So, Captain Dominick, I had a few questions for you after. I'd just like to say a few things and then ask you a few questions if that's okay. Part of the reason that we're here today talking about this and that the Hospice of Missoula kind of established that relationship with the coroner's department, with the sheriff department, with the coroner, was that we did have a number, at least 3 patients who have requested transporting, having their bodies transported by family afterwards. And my interest came about for this subject when I attended a workshop in Helena about 15 months ago. And unfortunately, I was only able to go to about 20% of it because my second child was born the next day and I had to rush home from Helena. But at that workshop, it was on specifically home funerals. And the woman who hosted it described her husband's service. And it just sounded very beautiful to me. And it was just something that I didn't know of as an option. And so this gentleman had met with the coroner in Helena, and he asked a lot of the same questions that you're being asked. And his answers were similar to yours. Well, I don't know anything that says you couldn't. You'd have to check Pierre. And this gentleman was asking, like, well, can I go up in a tree and let the birds eat me? And the coroner said, well, sure, but you can't have any human remains lying around, so you got to account for that. And there were all these questions, and what he discovered was that there was a lot that he could do. And what they settled on was he built his own casket with some slots underneath for inserting dry ice to keep his body at an appropriate temperature, which I think is in those handouts. It says, and they worked with the local funeral home, and they would come out and make sure that everything was okay each day. And he was able to remain in the home for over the 48-hour rule because they had accounted for that refrigeration. And so they basically had a memorial in the home where his body was there. Family and friends would come and gather and just spend time with him. And his spouse was able to be there with him. And that is not for everybody. For a lot of people, that idea is abhorrent. And for some people, that really resonates with them. And it was just something that I hadn't heard of before as an option. And so that's what piqued my interest about, well, what can you do in the home? What can you legally do? And then also, what can you do kind of practically? And I attended I was the officiant at a service here for a young man, and the family wanted to have a similar wake, but they did not want to do the refrigeration and all that. So they had sent the young man's body to the funeral home, and he was embalmed and then brought back to the home for 3 days, where they had a very similar experience. And then, so the funeral home was very involved in that procedure, and then they had a memorial service as well. So they had the wake at home and the memorial service. So there's so many different options for families out there. And first and foremost, you need to know what's legal. And so that was going to be, those were some of the questions that I wanted to ask. You've gone over a lot of it, but I wanted to find out, you talked about a hospice death where where you don't need to come out. And in that case, families are generally preparing for this over a long period of time. And so when the actual moment of death occurs, you might have some systems in place where we want to have the loved one in the home for 24 hours so that family can come and gather or something like that. But I was wondering, if I tell my wife that I want to have an in-home memorial and I want people to come and gather, and we're prepared for that, but I'm not on hospice, and what if I were to have a sudden event and but there's no it's not like a bleed, maybe a heart attack or something like that, where what would happen in that case?
If you died tomorrow, if you went home and died tomorrow, I would come look at you and I'd look for signs of a crime, signs of overdose, anything like that. And you're a young man, so I'm going to take you to the medical examiner.
Okay.
And it's really not up to the family, because by law I have to determine the cause of manner of death, and he shouldn't die. So I can't call your doc and say, he says you have a terrible heart condition, he looks really good, but he's been at risk, then I wouldn't.
Sure.
But if you don't have a doctor, the doctor can't give me any idea, I'm going to take you for an autopsy. Every autopsy, we're lucky that the state medical examiner is here in Missoula, so we do quite a few. It costs the county $650, and the county pays for that. And then it takes a couple days. Your body's then released to the funeral home or released to wherever you want it to be released to after that.
Okay. So those are questions I had. And then I know, Megan?
I just have a question. If the family requested a funeral home not to be involved, who would transport the body at that point to the medical examiner's office? Because I work at the funeral home, we do primarily most of the transportation.
Well,
if not all of
what
that.
we do is we have the funeral home transport the body. Okay,
Right.
and then that charge is passed on to the county.
Would a family potentially
To the
then put a
funeral
courier
home
call?
or to the medical examiner.
Well, because they
No.
can't get in.
They can't get in.
Right.
It's really not really a publicly announced place because it's an evidence type
Sure.
place. I've had a fisherman die up in Sealy Lake a number of years ago, and I put him in my truck. If it's too far up in the woods,
Sure, yeah.
when Chris Spurgeon died up on Lolo Peak, I was the coroner. I got helicoptered in and dropped on a line by helicopter, and we picked the body up eventually, and I ended up having a snowshoe out. But we do it. If we don't get a funeral home, or they're going to take too long or whatever, we'll put them in a car or a truck and take them to the medical examiner. Like I talked about the Sealy Lake, if a person wants to move the body around themselves, they're welcome to do that. They just fill out that form and can do that. But to go to the medical examiner, you need a coroner. So that's what we do. I've had a number of very small children die, and what I learned over time was it was helpful for the family. We would wrap the baby up in whatever they wanted to wrap the baby up in, and then the family would take the baby and put the baby in my front seat, and I would drive right to the medical examiner. And that seemed, I used to do that myself, but it seemed once I tried it once with one family, it seemed to help them take the baby and go there. But you know what? When we're talking about the medical examiner, it's an investigation at that point, and that's the way we have to treat it.
Sure.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm Nancy Picard, and I want to know what kind of training and what kind of counseling do you guys get? I mean, you're dealing with really tough stuff on a daily basis, and I'd love to know.
All right,
I mean,
so-
I loved how you said that you were from the Air Force and you're police, and I think you have this, I mean, you're incredibly intelligent, but you have this tough guy exterior, and what you see on a day-to-day basis is hard.
All right,
How
well,
do you deal with it?
there's a reason the senior guys are coroners. Because I was talking to the chaplain before, I hate to say it, but you feel damaged by so much grief. I've spent 7, 8 years as undersheriff for 2 different sheriffs. So I did a lot of the high-profile coroner cases. I've had to tell the sheriff his wife was killed. Just terrible cases over and so I fish. When I'm off, I fish. That's all I do. That's the only piece I get. I can concentrate on fishing, and I don't think about work. But it is tough. The younger guys, it's tough for them, so we try to have the older guys do it that have more years on the job, have learned how to cope with it. You know, I've been married for 35 years. I live out in the country. I live way up Penny Creek. So when I'm home, I don't listen for sirens or anything else like that. But it is very hard. The training you get, you go to a 40-hour, you're a cop first. Then you go to a 40-hour coroner course. You're at least a sergeant, so you've probably been on the department 7 or 8 years before you become a coroner. So as a sergeant, I've been a sergeant a couple times, and as a sergeant, I would get a case every day, it would seem like. And that's just part of my job, so I could count on that. And now I'm on call, so I'm only on call once every 7 weeks. So that 7th week, whatever, you don't sleep very good because you're waiting to get called out in the middle of the night. When I work all day, I mean, I had a call today. So I'm doing my regular job, and then I'll get called out. And as chief deputy coroner, it's actually probably helped me because I get to work with families after it's happened. I met a guy that was a boy killed up in Gold Creek, rolled his car in an accident. So his family came in from California, and I said, you know, I was just down in California at Clear Lake. And he said, well, I was fishing Clear Lake last week. So we actually fished the same bass tournament program. And he's coming up to fish a big tournament here in May on Noxon over in Trout Creek. So I said, well, you ought to go fishing with me. So I was actually able to take him out and go fish, which actually helped me probably more than it did him. But so you have to learn how to cope with it. Our guys retire as coroners, pretty much the senior staff, and a lot of them will retire because of the coroner issue, because they just, you know, it's just is hard. And it's
Does
the tragedy
the sheriff's department, do they provide counselors for you guys?
Well, I'm on the critical incident stress debriefing team, and you know, we have a chaplain that can go with us on calls. But the problem for me, and I could get emotional about it, unfortunately, but the problem is that it's so much senseless tragedy over and over and over. If I go to your house to tell you that your 90-year-old mother is deceased, that's not a surprise. If I go tell a 20-year-old that his 60-year-old, 50-year-old mother's died, probably not a surprise. When you're 20, well, I got that 40-year-old, man, he's old. He's old as Methuselah. So most people, it's not a surprise when their parents pass. But when you have to go, I was the coroner when those girls were killed over out on Easy Street out there on Hellgate. And that is tough because people don't expect that. We've got all these split families, so you're running from house to house to house with multiple parents.
So do you have to deliver the news too?
That's my job. That's who does it. That's who does it, is the coroner. And that's, so kind of the guys are, you know, wound pretty tight and maybe short with you or something, but these guys have a tough life. You know, we get paid really well. Missoula County is a great county to work for. Ibsen is the best sheriff I've ever worked for. I worked for probably 4 or 5 different sheriffs. A great sheriff to work for, and Missoula County provides us plenty of help, but it's still difficult. So.
How many of the coroners are women?
0. We have 2 deputies we have 2 female deputies in the department. That's one of Carl's programs, is getting more female deputies on it. They have a lot more female officers in the police department, but in the county, you work by yourself. So as a sergeant, I would have 6 guys, me and 5 other guys on my team, spread over 2,600 square miles. So we've hired females before, and it's got to be a certain type of girl, lady that is really self-sufficient and really confident and really squared away, because that person, well, and it doesn't matter. I've got one female now, Paige Pavlo, that is as tough as anybody and mentally tough, and that's the important part. She could talk a big lumberjack down into getting in the car in handcuffs. She doesn't panic, really squared away, but that takes a certain type of person, because I also worked the reservation, and female officers on the reservation, different culture, they were not respected at all by the criminals. And you would have to back up every female officer like immediately if she was going to be in a fight to the death. So it's different out in the county. I've been in fights in the county by myself for 15 minutes when I worked for Lake County, fighting one guy for 15 minutes. So you've got to be able to be on your own, and unfortunately sometimes you're going to get in a fight. And we've had some females with little kids say, hey, I could be killed out here tomorrow, this isn't for me. It's a little easier in the city because there's more backup. But Paige Pavlo, she's an officer I put against anybody. I mean, she is really squared away, really self-confident, very super smart. So, but it takes a special female to be on her own. Really, the criminal world is a men's world. You look at our jail out there, it's full of men, and it's full of violent men. There's very few violent females in our jail. You meet some. The girl that was caught in this internet crimes against children sting the last week, the reason she really stood out, one of my younger guys was the detective on that. He said, this is the most evil woman I've ever met. So mainly, we don't meet females like that. Mainly, the criminal world is 90 to plus. The violent criminal world is probably 98% men. So if you're a female officer, you're working against male criminals the majority of the time. Most females are in jail for theft, fraud, or drugs. Very few violent DUIs, maybe. Where Dr. Rance has worked in correction for years and years, and she can say that the criminal world is a man's world. And unfortunately, it takes a special female to enter that world and be able to deal with it. That's might not be politically correct, but that's what I've seen as 20 years as a cop.
Mike, I get you back to the topic here. What I'm hearing you say, and based on my own experience, I think this is true. Long before people die, they should deal with these issues.
Yes. Yes.
Before they get to hospital. I mean,
Yep.
I should deal with it tomorrow. My ex-husband wanted a natural burial at his brother's farm, and they managed to get it was a lovely service with a woven casket and not embalmed, but in a cemetery. They couldn't in one day's time work the logistics to get him transported across the state line to his brother's farm and that kind of thing. But it would have been perfectly feasible if it had all been lined out ahead of time.
Right, and that's why I think one of the reasons we're here is these issues come up, like, we want to do this right now. And if you want to do it right now, it's a real problem. If you want to do it a year from now, you can see with the laws, it can all be worked out to whatever your desires are, really, that are at least safe. Yeah.
My name's Dale Mayer, and I'm a nurse. And no one I've learned through personal and professional experience, you're never ready for someone you care about to die. Certainly it's easier when they're 95. Okay? But what strikes me through some research I've done and my own personal experiences is the sudden deaths are really hard because you come to investigate the death, and yet they feel somewhat personally attacked with the questions. They know an investigation's going on and they know that investigation needs to happen, but it's amazing because I did some interviews with people. Sometimes it was perfectly fine, they knew what was happening, they understood, it was fine. Other people felt like, why are they asking me? Like they think I did something, and so that tension is there. And I wonder how you handle that, because I always think of the survivors.
We try to separate the cop from the coroner. And it's tough when you're the sergeant because you're in uniform.
You're in uniform.
But that's the first thing I tell families when I come in. This is why I'm here. I'm required just to determine a cause and manner of death. And this is basically, a lot of times I call it paperwork. We have to do some paperwork. But I try to, it's easier for me because I'm in plain clothes. But we try to separate that this, and I tell them right up front, this is not a criminal investigation. We don't think anything happened, but the state requires me to fill out some paperwork and investigation things. And unfortunately, human nature, you have deputies that are better at it than other deputies, I think. So sometimes there's terrible friction, and it's usually just a miscommunication.
Well, because I think the families are in shock and they haven't processed, and if they haven't had these conversations ahead of time, that makes it double hard, especially if they're young and all those things. I get that, but it's an interesting melding of the investigative role and the sympathetic role.
Some counties, like Sanders County, it's a civilian coroner. I don't know how it came about. I've never looked at how the sheriff coroner system came about. But in other, you go to other states, the coroners are all doctors. And that would be very costly, I think, for Montana. But
And I've heard some very good things from people about how their questions were answered and their bereaved friends. So it's both, there's both. But I really commend you guys, because I know it's a hard job that you do.
Going around right now are some note cards. I'd love for everyone to be able to take one for just a little exercise that we might do together. As Captain Dominick was talking about, you don't want to wait until it's too late to start thinking about these things, to start thinking about your memorial service for a loved one. And I was reading an article in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. The monks and the nuns, they have what's called a death box that they attend to regularly. It's a box filled with readings or articles or objects, things that have meaning to them. And so, and it's something that's revisited. It's a box that you put together thinking about your own death, thinking about your own, unfortunately, everyone will die, and thinking about that, and having it be something present. In the Catholic tradition, there's an old tradition of the memento mori, the reminder of death. And the catacombs in France are filled with bones, human bones, and beautiful ornate structures made out of the remains of human beings as a reminder that we will all be there someday. It's not, one of the reasons that we started these community conversations on death and dying is to bring this subject into our minds more. It's something that we don't necessarily think about or want to think about because it can be uncomfortable. It can be unsettling to think about losing the people we love and losing our own lives. And so what I thought we might do tonight in kind of the spirit of the death box, if you will, is just to take a moment and to think about if you are fortunate enough not to have a sudden event, an accident or a sudden death, think about what you might like with you while you are going through that process of dying. Who would you like to be there? What would you like to hear? What would you like to be in the room? What might you like to have close to your body? What objects are significant for you? What words might you like to hear? Whether it's reading or scripture or music. Think about those things for just a moment and jot down 2 or 3 things that you might like to have present with you as you go through the dying process. And I'll tell you, as you're going through this, doing this now is such a gift to your family. If you share that with them. Because I'll tell you, when you're in the midst of that trauma of seeing someone that you love passing away, it's so wonderful to know what to do, or at least know one thing to do, something that somebody wishes. Because we don't know what to do, because we don't go through it more than a few times in our own families. And so think of it not just for yourself, but as a gift to your friends and family to go through this exercise. And of course, this is an invitation. You don't have to do it. And then as those things are coming out from the pen to the paper, know that this is not kind of a permanent list either. It's something that you can go back to, something that you can revisit. It's a really profound practice of facing that fact. And it can be a powerful practice to share with your family, to talk about these things. In fact, it can be an entry point. I know in my family, when my parents talk about their aging and their wishes for death, my brother just will not talk to them about it. He can't do it. It's too hard for him. But he's getting a little better at it. But it's a hard process to go through. And it's even harder for children to talk about that with their parents, about what they would like for themselves. And then, if you'd like to, on the other side, take a moment and think about 3 things, or 2 or 3 things that you might like to happen after you pass away. 95% of the people wish to be at home when they pass away, but that's not always possible. And knowing a little bit about what's legal, and knowing some things that might happen. What would you like to happen for that remembrance? Where would you like to be for those moments afterwards, if you're able to be, remain in the place where you are? As you're thinking about these things, at that home funeral workshop, one of the most beautiful pieces of that service that I remember is when they took the gentleman's body and they finally removed it from the home, and they put it in the cardboard box to go to the crematorium. The family and friends took a little moment to write on the box, to write wishes, blessings, remembrances, things like that that would go with the person. There's so many things that we can do. I've suggested to families of, as someone is dying and not able to communicate, leave a little bowl of paper next to them so that you can write something, a memory or a feeling or a blessing to that person that can go with them wherever they go, whether they go to the funeral home to be embalmed for a viewing, whether they go to the funeral home to have their body kept until burial, whether they go to a crematorium, whether they're going direct. There's so many possibilities. But those blessings, those slips of paper, those words of remembrance can go with that person. There's many, many different things to be able to do. Even in the event of a sudden death, when a person is required to go to the medical examiner, that's not the end of the story. There's more things that can happen at that time, and thinking about it ahead of time is really a gift to not only yourself but your family.
Please take someone out of Montana.
Can
Did you say that louder?
Can you take someone out of Montana?
Yeah. Can you transport somebody?
Yes. I would contact the state you're going to make sure, but it's called a trip permit. And that's basically what this does. It says what location.
Mike, has that gotten easier over the years? When my dad died many, many years ago, out of state, long ways out of state, and they actually made us send in to buy an airplane seat for an alleged person who was traveling with the body. I mean, it was just a nightmare kind of thing.
As far as the airlines, I'm not sure. I don't know how it works with the airlines. I know one of the highway patrolman's mother died in Washington or Oregon, maybe Seattle, I guess. So she died in Seattle, and he borrowed a van and brought her back, so without really any problem at all. I know the funeral home had to mount some.
I think I can answer that. In airline, they charge you for cargo because the bodies are expensive, but there's no requirement for somebody to accompany the body.
Good.
They have to do that.
From one state to another.
They do.
Well, we've experienced that here in Missoula.
I think it would be the state law, or whatever.
That was Utah.
Because in Montana, it just has to be chilled to 35 degrees. That's the law in Montana. It's going to be transported over 36.
Right, when you transport across state lines, you have to follow state law in each of the states that you cross. Okay, so if you're going from Montana to Iowa, you have to figure out what state law is in each individual state as you cross it, so it gets quite problematic. Some states require embalming, some do not. Some require you to refrigerate to 38 degrees, some do not. So, and all of them do have the time frame, within 36, 48 hours, but transportation's different. Some only allow 8 to 12 hours for transportation. So you have to figure it out per state.
Even when it's flown, or are you just talking driving?
Well, flying has some of the same rules. Common carrier, whether it's flown or a train or a bus, there's different ways to do that. There are regulations that you have to follow as well. You can fly a body without embalming it. We have to dry ice the body to get the body to 38 degrees. Then you've got it's problematic flying out of it. We can't fly human remains out of Missoula. They don't have planes big enough. We've got to get them to Spokane or Bozeman. So there's a lot of different things you've got to think about there with transporting.
It's where all this pre-planning comes in.
Yeah. But people travel so much now, and I know so many deaths of people in different places for whatever reason. Of course, out-of-country deaths are just a nightmare to deal with.
I was going to say I apologize. I'm a chaplain. I'm used to silence. It's okay with me.
So, I have a question. Ashes, did I understand you saying correctly that you can kind of do whatever you want with ashes?
Pretty much.
That's not a big deal.
Nope.
Is that right? Okay.
In Missoula County.
Pretty much statewide, right?
In the state of Montana, yes.
I mean, there are places that won't allow you to strew them in a lake or.
There's a, if you look at, the lakes are fine. If you look it up, and I should have brought it, but I didn't. There's a good article on cremation from the MSU Extension Office. Has a very lengthy article on what you can do with remains. The funeral homes are very good about telling you what you can do. The other guys have worked this all the time, but I looked that up on another case. It must be 5 or 6 pages on exactly what you can do with national forests. If you were to do this on an Indian reservation, you need permission of the tribe to do it. BLM land was fine, the lakes were fine. So that's what I would look up. If you're interested in that, there's a great article from the MSU Extension Office. Yes, sir.
What do you mean the lakes were fine? The lakes that were on BLM land or on lakes on?
Lakes everywhere. I mean, Flathead Lake. Flathead Lake, if you wanted to be cremated and your ashes put in Flathead Lake.
Oh, I see.
You'd be fine. My family owns a lake in Virginia. And we put everybody up on the dam or on the lake or whatever, and they go fish.
I just, can I share an anecdote? Is that I just saw a movie called Beasts of the Southern Wild. And the ending of that movie is probably not following the rules, but the way that they memorialized the passing of a person was the community put them in a floating boat, and it was in Louisiana, so it's definitely in the waterline. But they put them in a floating boat, and it was a funeral pyre. So that's how it was done. And I definitely comes to mind when I think about, you know, really thinking out of the box and what you'd like to do. And I wrote, because of Greg's note card, I wrote, oh, I'd like to be on the water. I don't know if that's possible.
That's when I would talk to like Department of Environmental Quality.
Sure.
That's unusual enough that I don't know.
I bet it's not. That's my guess.
You're speaking of body in water?
I'm thinking of a burning, deceased person in a boat that's floating on the water. But that's how it was in the movie, so I'm just
A Viking bird. I don't know. It sounds like they wouldn't let you do it. Yeah, it sounds to me something like they wouldn't let you do it. You'd have to do it in the middle of the night on your own.
Did you just say that? You know you're on tape. And you know, one of the things that I want to say is that there are a lot of possibilities, and folks in Montana tend to be very kind of DIY and want to start from the ground up. But you know, we have experts here that can serve us in whatever it is that we wish to do. You know, I know Tyson and Megan over there are they know this stuff and they can answer questions. And you know, it's never too early to start talking about it if you have kind of an unusual wish. And an unusual wish could be, well, it could be anything, you know, whatever it is that you would like to do for yourself or for your family. And it would be really wonderful. I just had this thought when you were asking about that. You know, if every one of us had this idea for a funeral pyre at sea, you know, and we'd all have to go do the research our own. It would be nice if there was some kind of clearinghouse for that information about what you can and can't do, you know, when someone's gone through the trouble of asking what it is. But you know, the other piece to that, you know, we're talking right now about mostly focusing on the body immediately after death. There's a whole host of things that you can do after that process too, after a person has been buried or cremated or things like that. And just thinking about that part of the memorial service. You know, for some people, we've talked to families at hospice that want to have their loved one removed as soon as possible. But then they want to have some kind of memorial, you know, at the family ranch or something like that. So there's these pieces too to consider, that a lot of what we've been focusing on is kind of the body in the home or wherever it is. But just to be thinking about what to do afterwards. There's a handout over on the table in the center here, just with some ideas of in-home memorial in-home memorials, whether there's a person present or not. You know, the one thing that I will say in talking to people that who have been on hospice, or it's been a death that was not unexpected in the home, is that having their loved one there for an extended period of time, whether that extended period was 12 hours or in the case of that family in Helena, it was 72 hours. They say that having them there really helped them know that they were gone. And a lot of the families who haven't thought about this, haven't talked about it with their loved ones, when the person is removed too quickly, it took a lot longer to really realize that that person's body was was gone, but it still, it felt like the relationship that they had was still there and lingered, whereas the people who chose to wait for an extended period of time, they were able to develop a different relationship. So the relationship with their loved one was that relationship they could let go of, and they developed this new relationship with the loved one who was no longer in that body. So just being in the presence of that.
I had an experience like that. I stayed with my mother, but rigor mortis set in. Not a good feeling.
How quickly does that set in?
Excuse me?
How quickly does rigor mortis set in?
About 12 hours. That's when it starts.
There's a corollary to that of how difficult it is to deal with the death of a loved one if you do not see the body at all.
Right.
Very.
And I think another thing that I learned is there's no right or wrong way. And so letting families know, the survivors, that there's no right or wrong. And so what may work for someone else may not be anything that would work for me and my family, but that it's okay. And I've learned not to judge and just be, what would you like, what would feel good for you? Those words can mean a lot for families.
And I work in grief and bereavement. I coordinate bereavement services for Hospice. So I find that very much when I'm dealing with a family, who has lost a family member under whatever circumstances, that can be something that really, it can even complicate the process of, moving through in whatever way one will. Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that.
In many traditional cultures, the preparing of the body, cleaning of the body, dressing it, whatever, is part of that after-death ritual.
I had kind of a different experience in that I never saw my father's dead body. He was already cremated by the time that I came on the scene, but I did go to scatter his ashes. And it actually helped me not to have seen the body, because I could come in alignment with the fact that he was dead in my own time, in my own way, organically, rather than being confronted with this dead body. So I actually appreciated the way it worked for me.
Traditionally at these community conversations, we take a little moment to go around, well, I'd say the circle, but I don't see a circle. I see I see a lot of people. And, and just take a moment to offer a reflection or something that you'd like to offer the group. Whether it's something you learned, something that you'll think about, something that you want to share that you might be helpful for other people. And again, it's never a requirement to speak or do this, but it would be, and if you choose not to speak, that's totally fine. Just let the person next to you know that you choose not to speak. And I can begin, and I can just say that this is the second time I've been able to sit down with you, and I really appreciate your even, calm presence, and I mean, you've really put a lot of thought into, where you are in your profession, as well as, thinking about the families, and it's really a pleasure to sit with you, and hear about your experiences.
We really appreciate Hospice. We are big supporters.
I'd like to say our first great
our first grandchild passed on. She had to be flown to Salt Lake. My daughter brought her back in a box, but her five brothers-in-laws made her casket. I made the lining for it, and we buried her on top of a mountain. And what an experience. I'll never forget it. Now her siblings, she has 8, want to know the story. But our daughter was only 19 and she kind of spaced it out. So it's up to Grandma to continue the story. And it was quite an experience.
I think what I really enjoy about this evening is I've always been interested in green burials and just bringing some normalcy to it, knowing a little bit more legally what we can and can't do. And there's a great resource, just one of many, I'm sure, that, for anyone that might be interested. Jerry Lyons, Lyons, is a great one, a good resource about home burials.
Did you say green burials?
You said it's green. I've never heard green burials.
That's what they call it if you Google it online.
Pass. Pass.
I'll pass.
I'm saying that.
Pass.
I pass.
Well, I've been with several people when they've asked. Recently, my father in November, and you know, it's an honor and privilege to be with that person who passed. And my father was in his 90s, and he lived a long, good life. But one of the things that was important, because I have a fairly good-sized family, was to know whether you wanted a celebration of life or a funeral. And that's one thing with families that I'll just comment on, that there can be some conflict over. And but we were very fortunate that in the end, everybody was very, very happy with what we did. We had a celebration of life. And but I had one brother that said, I don't get it. I do not understand what a celebration of life is. But he says, I'll go along with everybody else. That's okay. But I said, well, what do you want? Well, anyway, old-fashioned. Well, what's old-fashioned? It's a funeral. It's, you know. And in the end, he just said, thank you, this is wonderful. He said, I'm going to dance out there smiling down. And he is so happy over everything that we did. But that's a big one to talk to families about. Celebration of life versus a funeral.
Come back with again.
I'm really pleased that I came tonight. My name is Ellie Munoz, and I have an aged parent, one parent still living here in town. And as far as I know, they live another 10 years. He maintains that people go another 10 years. But I'm really happy to learn about and to understand how important it is to pre-plan. And he has a last directive, which was really interesting to go through with him because he's such a wisecracker that he made it kind of fun. I have had many close experiences with people who have passed in my community. I was born here in 1950 in Missoula, and so when I open the obituary page, many times I know every day I pretty much know someone or some relative of someone. So I see it as profoundly beautiful as the birth process, And I understand the circle now. And I think we live in a wonderful time when we can share all of this, because there was a period of repression where you just didn't say the word death. You certainly didn't prepare for it. And there were many supposed rules about how it had to be. So I was very enlightened by your information tonight. Thank you for that.
I'm of Norwegian descent. My wife and I went over to Norway, and in Norway, almost the whole family history is in the churchyard. I mean, as offsprings, you know, as you die and the kids come along, they have no place to go to really remember you unless there's a nice central like churchyard. But you know, people wanting to be buried on top of a mountain or throw the ashes in a lake, family can't tie in with it. You know, I guess that's my, but of course I'm a railroad nut, and I'd like to be cremated and have my ashes spread between the railroad tracks. No kid's going to come down there and let's see which mile am I kind of spread out along. But I still do think, like, you know, the cemetery here and everything. You know, hey, this is where he is. I mean, you can kind of set around that, where I know a lot of the wishful, and maybe it's best the other way too, I don't know.
But the first things they did to us was show us the cemetery where so we're buried. And we got there.
You can go back hundreds of years in Norway, going out to the church cemetery.
Well, I just want to say it's an honor and privilege to be here in this room tonight. So thank you to all. And my other little reminder is when the funeral, the celebration of life, the whatever happens, remember, for those surviving family members, their journey is just beginning. So those notes and phone calls and follow-up and all those weeks and months and years that follow become really important for those family members. So please take that with you, as well as the wonderful information you've got.
I just want to say that I didn't know about these things that happened and the community conversations, and it's been great to listen to everybody here and learn. Everybody seems so wise, and you know, I feel like I love hearing people that have advice and things to offer to kind of, you know, like the younger generation. I love hearing everybody's thoughts that way, and it's just great that there's this awareness that you guys are trying to bring awareness to everybody in Missoula and the community. So thanks.
I love these get-togethers. I probably enjoy them too much because I sometimes think, wow, I'm just so focused on this part of life. But I'm going to go back to what you said about birth, and what struck me tonight is we're all here talking about possibilities. We're talking about green burials, we're talking about, oh my gosh, we can really anoint the body. Oh, how about this? Think about the words you might want when you're dying. And I wonder if a lot of pregnant women got together about 100 years ago or 80 years ago and had the same discussion, because I feel like it's the same sort of thing. What we used to think was what had to happen doesn't happen anymore. And I hope that I'm still alive, that when, you know, death becomes such a personal experience and not a medical experience. And I love that we're talking about this, because I think that's how the whole Hamas movement got started. I think we can really change the way people feel about death and dying, and this is how it starts, so thank you.
I just want to say I lost my wife in November, and I thought I was pretty tough and I could take care of her, but I depended on hospice, and I want to thank them, and they were a lifesaver.
I just want to say thanks to everybody. Mind expanding to think about things like this with a group of people. Greg's idea of writing down what's in our death box. I definitely have nothing material, and I really did want to think that a person would come, because I don't want to have that as a disappointment for me. But I did think about music, and I definitely thought that I want music while I'm dying and in celebration, because that's what I'm into, you know. Music on a railroad, maybe. But I know that Hospice, you know, Mary and Lars offer music, and that's beautiful. I also thought of the tradition that's in my chant from Louisiana, where it's called a second line, and after someone does pass, then their family and some members of their community and friends just have a procession and walk down the street and perform music. And if there's any place north of the Mason-Dixon that I think would be ready for that, would be Missoula. I've seen the Day of the Dead procession and so forth and so on. So it's just another way to celebrate not the body but the person. That if it's right for them, we can consider that.
I also appreciated the cards, even though I didn't write anything down. It really stimulated my mind. Because I thought about it, that this is my life work in hospice. And tonight also gave me an opportunity to reflect on my past experiences with death. I had a lot of experiences with death before I was even out of high school. And in my short life, that helps me to take that reflection from tonight to put it towards my future experiences. Because I'll have many more experiences with death. And I look forward to it, believe it or not. It's a weird thing to say. I really do. I like what Claire had said. It's more of a personal experience. We want to move towards that instead of a medical experience.
I want to thank everybody who came tonight. Hospice in Missoula has been doing the community conversation for quite some time, and it's surprising to see how many people come for certain topics, and how courageous people are to share their stories and ask the questions and be brave enough to be here. So thanks, you're part of that movement that will help make things more natural for us all, more accepted and easier along the way.
I'll just say that I appreciate the questions. I think they're always lovely questions to meditate upon too. And what always surprises me is how my answers change. And so the stress on the fact that these aren't the answers, it's just part of a process. Keep asking the questions.
I don't want to forget the people in the corner back here behind Greg.
I would just say that it's such a great opportunity for us to be exposed to people that we may not be in contact with unless we are, in the position to need hospice or to need funeral services. And both of my parents received hospice services and had a close friend pass away, and I still remember how professional and how grateful I was to the people at the funeral service for how delicate they handled everything, and hospice was absolutely a lifesaver. So thanks to everybody who does this work. It's fantastic, and this has been good just to kind of keep my mind open to what I want to do, because I think really preparation helps survivors to just kind of feel validated that, yeah, we're doing what that person wanted.
This is the first time I've ever been to one of these meetings. I guess, like maybe other people, I'm an occupational therapist, and in my work, occasionally I'll have a patient that dies, and it might have been a person I worked with one day, it might have been a person I worked with 3 days. And as I've gotten older, I felt like I gotta call those family members, because even if I was only involved in their life one day, maybe those people would like to know what that last one day was like.
I don't know. I guess I would probably echo the sentiments of many people here. And I think it's really important to make the service about the family. I had my father, my stepfather, and my father-in-law all pass away within a fairly short time period, 2 or 2.5 years, and had very different experiences, but each was perfect for the individual. My father, also extremely frugal. And I was sitting at the funeral home. I was the executor for his estate. They were kind of pressuring me. It was to the point where we had to make a decision, and I just thought I'm going to be haunted for the rest of my days if I spend a couple of $100 on a box for his remains, let alone something for, you know, like a casket. And I was sitting there, and I just finally had this epiphany, odd as it is, and I said, I don't need anything from the funeral home. And my dad had been in the military and was law enforcement, and we put his cremains in a military ammo can, which I think the gentleman at this funeral home probably, it took every ounce of composure he had to keep a straight face, and everybody who attended my father's funeral said this was perfect. You know, here's this packed house at the church, Catholic church, and here in the front is this beat up green military ammo can. And there was that, and it was perfect. My father-in-law, very, very Catholic, big into the Knights of Columbus, very formal, a lot of ceremony, perfect for his family. My stepfather, he worked in the extension office as a master gardener. He didn't want any sort of a service. We had him cremated. Later in the summer, when we could get an apple tree, we all, family, friends, got together, got a hole in the backyard, put a tree in it, and he's out there with his apple tree. So, all very different, all very personal, all very perfect. So, make it about you and your family. So.
As some of us get older, like I am, you think more about these things.
Yeah.
And, you know, actually I'm looking forward with some anticipation. When I was born, I didn't know what was coming, and all of a sudden pop up in this great world. And it's been a pretty good journey all the way. And when I die, which we're all going to do, I'm not signing up right away, but when I do go, you know, I'm looking forward to that, because I think, you know, the body's going to be here, my soul's going to go off and have a whole new experience, whatever that might be. And I think it's going to be even better than here. So, you know, I think you got to develop some kind of an attitude, because we're all going to go there. And you better be thinking about that. And I do think about that quite a bit, and with anticipation.
May I piggyback on what you just said? My sister Betsy, who was just less than 2 years older than me, she and I were very close, and she died in a skydiving accident when she was 20 and I was 19. And some policemen came to my parents' door. I had just moved into the dorm at Northwestern, and my mother said the minute she opened the door, she knew what had happened. And my parents never picked up my sister's body, because they just couldn't deal with it. But I will tell you, to me, the ultimate question that presented to me is, and which is the thing that I think that we all don't talk about, but it's the big question, is where did we come from and where do we go? Where did we come from and where did we go? And she came to me 3 days after she died, and I had the most hyper-real experience, and she said, Nancy, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, and you are exactly where you're supposed to be, and I will always be right here. And she touched my nose, and it was, we didn't communicate by words, but we communicated through kind of thought processes, and it was an experience that changed my entire life. And I feel her near me, and I feel her all the time, and I just think that that's the big question that none of us are talking about. We talk about bodies and not that that's all incredibly appropriate, but all of that is for the living. But the big question is where do we go? And a friend of mine, her son died kayaking. And I'll never forget Sally. She said, I drive up to the lake and I look at the mountains and I just think, Max, where are you? Where are you? And I just think that's the big question is where do we come from and where do we go? And I just, through that experience with my sister, it was the biggest blessing of my life because I know without a doubt, not through a religious experience, not through doctrine, but because of my own personal experience with my sister, that we come from someplace and we go on. And I think for me personally, that's the greatest comfort in the world. And I was given a great blessing through my sister's death.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think what happens afterwards is it's a big question, and so much, and it really can help to a large extent to determine how we die, whether we have beliefs about the afterlife, if we don't have them, if we're neutral, if we're not sure. I think all of that really influences quite a lot of the dying process, and I say that having been, I used to be a hospice volunteer for many years, many moons ago, and even before that, I was around a lot of people who were dying from different religious traditions. And it's interesting, you mentioned the death box, the Tibetan Buddhists. I would follow Tibetan Buddhism myself, have done for many years, and the idea of the death box, it's actually premised on what happens during the dying process. You have mantras and all different kinds of things in the box, and some of them you place on the body, and there's all kinds of other stuff. But the whole point of that, I think, is because the dying process is, from the Buddhist perspective, is seen to be absolutely crucial to what happens afterwards. And so, and probably some of you are familiar with the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying by Sogyal Rinpoche, which explains that quite well. There are different traditions with Tibetan Buddhism, and things can differ a little bit, but generally there are certain things that are kind of common to how you guide the person through the dying process. And it's so important, and I like your questions about who would you like with you when you die? What kind of things would you like to be around you when you're dying? And for me, given that, for my religious faith, it's interesting because I can look at, best case scenario, I've got quite a lot of time to prepare for my death. So let's say a few days before I die, I might want to see this person, that person, and so on. And as I get closer and closer to my death, the way I see it is I would want to have input from people who have a similar philosophy about the dying process and what happens afterwards, and that can help my mind to be calm during that process. And so the people who I would want with me during that process are going to change as I get closer and closer to death. And I think obviously people who've worked in hospice, other people who've been around people who are going through a gradual dying process will see the person who's dying want quite different things. And it's also been my experience that whether I'm with a friend who's Catholic, whether they're Buddhist, whether they don't have any kind of faith, anything that I do within my spiritual practice, even silently, because a Catholic's not going to want to hear my Buddhist mantras, it will still be so beneficial to the person who's dying. So, and the afterlife stuff is amazing. And I think I'm just curious if you have any speakers that maybe come and talk about that aspect of what happens afterwards, just or maybe just an open discussion where people can share about their different philosophies or so.
It's a great idea.
I wanted to just say a couple of things. I've had this fascination with the thresholds of life,
Right.
Coming in and going out, and I just think there's so much magic in both of those things. And also what I have found in my end-of-life work is that there's humor. And some things are very funny, and some things come out, they just are. And so you might be talking with someone, and they'll remember something about a loved one and it's sort of funny. And I think that we become really serious about this, and yeah, it's an absolutely serious bit of life, but there's also some of that with it. And I've been working to engage my adult sons in conversations about this and what my desires are and what I want. I have a folder with, stuff, right? Music, readings, all of that. And my kids are just like, one son is very methodical, and he's like, okay, that's cool, man. The other one doesn't really want to hear, but I've been engaging some other young adults in conversations where I find the common language is about the music that people want. And so several of these young adults have come to me with their playlists for their memorial services and their funerals. And I must say that Another One Bites the Dust is one of the more prominent songs on those playlists. I just enjoy that so much, and I love these opportunities where we can come together and realize this is as much an important aspect of living as living and being birthed. Yeah.
We'll finish going around the group.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I just have a funny thing to add on to that about Another One Bites the Dust. My grandfather was a mortician, and my uncles would steal the hearse and drive around and blare that song.
I love it. I want to tell those people what
They probably got in trouble, but
yeah, but it probably was worth it.
And on a serious note, I really appreciate the opportunity to come together as a community to talk about Hospice. This is my first time as a host, and really informative, and I appreciate it a lot. And I also think it was good for me to sort of, because I do a great thinking about death and what I want for my body, and having conversations with my family, but I don't think a lot about dying. So it was, I think, really good for me to actually kind of explore that a little bit.
I'd like to pick it up again where I direct, anyway. I just want to let everyone know, I also work for Hospice in Missoula, and please spread the word that these evenings happen the third Thursday of every month. And it's marvelous to have so many people present to contribute to the conversation. It's a wonderful thing. I found myself through much of this conversation wondering about something. It has to do with something that Margaret has brought up and maybe helped me have a clearer picture about, although really not really, because it's a question that has to do with going way back to our earliest ancestors and those archaeological evidences that we find that demonstrate or that show that the community that these people died in it was very important for them. Death at that time wasn't really something we prepared for. Apparently, it just happened because people didn't live as long as we did. And what the idea is that preparation for the journey didn't happen until death actually happened. And then the community took on the responsibility of providing for that journey. And so you find artifacts of the community provided for that next stage of the journey. Maybe it was bow and arrow, or a shield, or coins, or whatever the community thought might be helpful for that continuing journey. But there's that thing, that concept which has come up here, that this idea that there's a journey involved, that when death comes, it's not as much of our culture now seems to gravitate toward the idea that, well, that's the end. When the body dies, that's the conclusion to the story. Anyway, so much of our conversation tonight has had to do with preparation. And now we are in a position to make those preparations more probably so than ever before death comes. and we're talking about it, and we have this opportunity to think about it. And I marvel at that option that we have now, and that it can be such an individual story, in contrast to what those ancient communities must very much have had the same thinking about the end of life in order to maybe help make those preparations. So there's really, for me, a dramatic contrast, going back really, really far in our history and what we have today. That was my thought.
I'll just share this as a funeral professional. I appreciate that people are actually talking about this beforehand. It's great to be able to do that. Let me just leave you with the quote that got me into funeral service, why I do what I do. And it's from William Gladstone, who was, he was Prime Minister of Britain under Queen Victoria. And he said, "Show me the manner in which a nation cares for its dead, and I will calculate with mathematical exactness the tender mercies of its people, their respect for the laws of the land, and their loyalty to high ideals." Death is a sacred experience, not just for the passage of the person that's left, but for everybody else that cared for that person. And so I appreciate the fact that we can talk about it, that it is individual, and that whatever the manner is, however we do it, we need to care for our dead personally. So, thank you.
Anybody else care to share before we close with you?
I don't know if other people have had this experience, but when my dad died at 70, either the first or second night after he died, he showed up at the foot of my bed and talked with me and reassured me everything's fine. And I don't know how common that is, but it's very, very reassuring.
I think it's a lot more common than people think. And I think, like I told you about my sister, I mean, I think people don't talk about it because it's very deep and personal, and it's your own experience, and nobody else can experience your experience. But I think it's extraordinarily common.
It is, and I think as well, just to give a bit of cultural perspective, you know, from England, for many, many decades, they've had spiritualist churches. There are usually several in each city, and spiritualist churches, they basically have traveling mediums that come. Usually they'll get a different one every week that goes on stage and will talk to the audience and bring forth, you know, people who've passed on and so on. Now, the great thing about spiritualist churches, I think anyway, they don't charge. I've been to several of them in England. They're very interesting. They don't charge. The mediums don't get paid. You don't pay as a member of the congregation. You might pay £1 for the tea and cookies afterwards or something. The mediums are well trained. They belong to a national organisation. They have training colleges for them, and it's very closely monitored. And they do hymns and stuff beforehand, but again, it's kind of multi-denominational. And my experience of them has been that it can really be a way for people to get a little bit of closure, and also it tends to open up the discussion. That for me was the most interesting thing, because I think so many people have had those experiences, so I think that's just a cultural perspective.
Thank you. Thanks, Captain Dominick. Do you have any? You're just hoping your phone doesn't ring.
Any favorite fishing holes?
No, you don't talk about those, especially now.
So I was just going to comment with several people that have talked about being dead is okay, basically. You know, that's my thing, that I don't have any fear of being dead. It's getting dead that's the problem. And that's where hospice is so incredibly valuable.
That's what Woody Allen says, right? I'm not afraid to die, I just don't want to be there when it happens. Thank you all for your participation tonight, and hopefully we'll see you again. Thank you. Thanks.